I never planned on living in that cabin full time. It was supposed to be a weekend retreat, a quiet escape from the noise of city life and the memories I didn't care to relive. My father built it with his own hands, plank by plank, long before the HOA even existed. Nestled at the end of a narrow gravel path, shielded by trees and perched just above the waterline of Crescent Lake. The place felt like a world apart. When I retired from the force after 27 years, 20 of them undercover, I packed up what little I had left and moved in for good. Solitude didn't bother me. Noise did. Especially the kind that came with people who wore fake smiles and used bylaws as weapons. The HOA wasn't a thing when Dad first claimed this slice of shoreline. Back then, it was just a few fishing cabins and dirt roads. But as the years rolled on and more folks with money started buying up plots, the HOA emerged like an algae bloom. They called it Silver Pines Estates, slapped up fancy signs, and started issuing rules about paint colors, dock lengths, and acceptable social behavior. My cabin, weather-worn, cedar-scented, and stubbornly unpainted, stood out like a sore thumb among the manicured lawns and chemically blue swimming pools. At first, they left me alone. I suppose I was the harmless recluse at the edge of their neatly trimmed kingdom. But that changed when Karen moved in 2 years ago. Karen, full name, Karen Buckley, was a whirlwind of control, Botox, and passive aggression. She got herself elected HOA president within 6 months of moving in, and quickly turned what was once a laid-back community into something that felt like a miniature dictatorship. Fines were handed out like flyers. Holiday decorations had to be seasonally appropriate. Even the ducks by the lake weren't safe. Karen once tried to get them relocated because they were too noisy near her sun deck. Still, I kept to myself. I paid no HOA dues. My property was legally excluded from the subdivision's boundaries, a technicality I had no intention of correcting. I kept my dock clean, my grass cut, and my property line clearly marked. But Karen never liked things she couldn't control. And to her, I was an itch she couldn't quite scratch. I first noticed her watching me from her golf cart during early morning drives around the lake. She'd slow down when passing my driveway, sometimes snapping photos on her phone. I didn't care. I wasn't doing anything wrong. Let her build a digital scrapbook of her obsession. I had nothing to hide. What I did have, though, was a security system. Not flashy, not visible. Just small motion-sensing cameras tucked beneath the eaves of the cabin, another relic of my law enforcement days. I didn't advertise them. People behaved differently when they thought no one was watching, and I preferred to see people for who they really were. The summer started quietly enough. The lake warmed up early that year, and families brought out their kayaks and paddleboards. Barbecue smoke drifted across the water in the evenings. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I should have known something was coming. Karen hadn't stirred the pot in months. That wasn't like her. The first sign was a flyer taped to the community board by the entrance gate. HOA Summer Social. Lakeside Potluck. At the Common Dock, all residents welcome. A harmless event, sure, but there was no such thing as a common dock near my property. The only dock on the West Shore was mine. I knew because I built it, so I took the flyer down. 3 days later, another one appeared, this time with a printed map showing my shoreline labeled Picnic Zone. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I simply walked to the HOA mailbox kiosk, stuck a note in her slot, and wrote Karen. That dock and shoreline are privately owned. Please remove them from your event map. Nate C. 2 days passed, no response. Then came the landscaping crew. I woke up to the sound of string trimmers and saw 2 men in neon vests edging the grass along my driveway. When I stepped outside, one of them waved. We're just touching up for the HOA event, he said. Karen said this section's public use green space. It's not, I replied. It's mine. You're trespassing. He scratched his head, looked unsure, then muttered something into his walkie-talkie. 5 minutes later, they were gone. That evening, I checked my cameras. One caught Karen walking the property line with a tape measure, muttering to herself. She paused at my dock, stared at the no trespassing sign I'd nailed up last year, and then turned sharply back toward her house. That should have been the end of it. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the retreating type. I spent the next week prepping the cabin, making sure the locks were solid, the boundaries clear, and my files in order. I pulled out my father's old deed, reread the lake access agreement, and made copies of everything, map surveys, even an old letter from the county clerk, verifying that my land wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. I wasn't gearing up for a fight, I was simply ready in case one came. It did. And when it arrived, it didn't come through the front door or with a certified letter. It came in the form of a party. Uninvited, loud, drunk, and walking straight down my dock like they owned it. It was a Saturday. The kind of warm golden morning where the lake surface looks like glass, and the only sounds are the distant echo of loons and the lazy creak of your own dock as it settles with the sun. I had just poured my second cup of coffee and was flipping through an old field journal I kept for water patterns and migratory birds when I heard it music. Not the kind that drifts from someone's open window, but full-on speakers thumping pop music loud enough to vibrate the old screen door. I stepped outside and the sound hit me in full. It was coming from the shore. My shore. At first, I thought maybe someone had launched a boat and anchored nearby, maybe just clueless teenagers. But as I followed the crunch of gravel down my side path toward the dock, what I saw stopped me cold. There were at least 15 people. Some in bright swimsuits, others in polo shirts and khaki shorts. Folding tables had been set up along the edge of the water, draped in pastel tablecloths, with coolers wedged underneath. Kids were running barefoot across the planks of my dock, while two women I didn't recognize were already inside my boathouse, my locked boathouse setting up what looked like wine glasses and hors d'oeuvres. I could feel the adrenaline pulse through my ribs as I stepped out from the trees and onto the path, staying calm, quiet, observing. That old habit from the force never really left me. Assess, evaluate, and only then engage. Near the dock entrance, I spotted her. Karen. Wearing a sun hat the size of a car tire, and a flowy red tunic that flapped dramatically in the breeze. She was laughing, drink in hand, pointing at something in the water like this was all part of some country club event. I cleared my throat loudly as I approached. A few heads turned. Karen didn't. "Excuse me," I said, "what's going on here?" She finally turned, took off her sunglasses with a mock gasp, and said, "Oh, Nate, I didn't think you were home. We're just enjoying the lake. It's such a lovely day, don't you think?" I walked up to her slow and steady. "You and your guests are trespassing. This is private property. That's my dock. And that boathouse is locked for a reason." Karen smiled like I'd told a joke. "Nate, don't be dramatic. The lake is a shared resource. Everyone has access. Public water doesn't mean public land," I said, keeping my voice even. "You crossed through my boundary, set up tables on my lawn, entered my boathouse, which is a felony, by the way, and didn't bother to ask permission." At this, one of her friends, a man with a backward visor and a half-drunk mimosa, chimed in, "Geez, man, lighten up. It's a party." I turned to him. "Would you like a stranger setting up a keg in your garage while you were eating breakfast?" He blinked, unsure how to answer. Karen put a hand on my shoulder, which I immediately brushed off. "You're overreacting," she said flatly. There was a misunderstanding with the maps. The HOA board assumed this section was part of the common shoreline. I even posted about the potluck in the newsletter. I narrowed my eyes. "You mean the one you slipped into everyone's mailbox without any county approval?" Her face twitched slightly. "Well, it's a courtesy newsletter. You can call it whatever you like, but this is trespassing. I need everyone off my property. Now." She held up her hands in mock surrender. Fine. We'll pack up. No need to get all grumpy." As I stood there, arms crossed, watching the guests grumble and slowly collect their things, I saw something that made my stomach drop. One of the younger men, probably mid-20s, was carrying out a tackle box from the boathouse. My tackle box. Another had one of my old outboard motor tools in hand, holding it like a toy. That's when I realized they hadn't just entered the boathouse, they'd ransacked it. I strode past Karen, ignoring her protests, and yanked open the boathouse door. Shelves had been emptied, boxes rummaged. A small cooler I kept locked, containing spare keys, permits, and my father's old revolver, was open. I turned back to her. "You let people into my locked boathouse." Karen waved her hand, clearly nervous now. "Oh, come on. It was open. Maybe it wasn't properly secured. I padlocked it yesterday. There's damage to the hasp. Someone forced it." "Are you accusing my guests of theft?" "I'm saying someone broke into my property, and you hosted the event that led to it." Her expression darkened. "If you think threatening me is going to get you anywhere." "I'm not threatening you," I said calmly. "I'm informing you. I'm calling the sheriff." That seemed to shake her. She stepped back, muttering something under her breath. I went back inside, locked the cabin door, and picked up the phone. But I never made the call. Not that time. Because as I reached for my handset, I saw flashing lights outside my window. Someone had already called the cops, and it wasn't me. I stepped out onto the porch just as two sheriff's deputies exited their cruiser and walked up the gravel path. Karen was behind them, crocodile tears already welling up, voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "There he is," she said. "He threatened us. He said he was going to hurt someone if we didn't leave." I was terrified. The deputy looked at me, then at Karen. "Sir, can we have a word?" I nodded. "Sure. You'll want to see something first." Without another word, I opened the screen door and pointed to the monitor near my entryway. The deputies followed me inside, where I pulled up the feed from earlier that morning. Full color footage, audio, everything. Karen's party, the trespassing, her brushing off my warnings, her guests inside my boathouse. The officers watched in silence. "Do you have documentation on this property line?" one of them asked. I reached for the folder sitting beside the monitor. Deed surveyor's maps correspondence with the Yeet County zoning office. "I've got it all." Karen's voice drifted from outside. "He's unstable. He's a loner. He lives out here all alone. I don't feel safe." The younger deputy raised an eyebrow and said to me, "She called this in as a public safety threat. Said you were screaming and holding a weapon." I shook my head. "You've seen the footage. I never raised my voice. Never touched a weapon." The senior officer gave a small nod. "You're right. It's all here." "Am I being charged with anything?" I asked. He looked out the window at Karen, then back at me. "No, sir. But I'd recommend keeping this footage safe. If this escalates, you'll want a copy on hand." "I've got backups," I said. "Good man." They left, soon after, calm professional, but clearly irritated that they'd been dragged out for a false report. Karen, on the other hand, looked ready to implode. She huffed off down the road, face red, yelling into her phone. I stood on my porch and watched the sun slip lower behind the trees, the lake now still again. It should have ended there. But with Karen, it never does. The morning after Karen's lakeside stunt and her ridiculous police report, I figured the storm had passed. Most people, after getting caught red-handed on security footage and embarrassing themselves in front of law enforcement, might have the decency to lie low, maybe even apologize. Not Karen. By noon, I noticed a crisp white envelope stuffed halfway into my mailbox. It wasn't mailed, it had no stamp or postmark, just hand-delivered and folded twice. Silver Pines HOA, stationery. Of course, I opened it on the porch, letting my coffee go cold in my hand. Violation notice, non-compliance with HOA community standards. To Alt Nathan C. Halpern. You are hereby notified of the following infractions. Unauthorized use of dock space for private events. Aggressive behavior toward HOA guests and residents. Failure to comply with shoreline maintenance expectations. I actually laughed. Unauthorized use of my own dock. Aggressive behavior based on her word alone. Shoreline maintenance. I mowed every 2 weeks and picked up lake debris without being asked. Hell, I was the reason the shoreline was clean enough for them to party on in the first place. At the bottom of the letter, a bold red warning. You have 10 days to correct these violations before further action is taken. No signature, just Silver Pines Estates Homeowners Association. Enforcement Committee. Which, of course, meant Karen. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My property was not under HOA jurisdiction. My father made sure of that when he filed the original deed exclusions 35 years ago. But ignoring Karen never worked. She mistook silence for weakness and took it as permission to escalate. By Wednesday, I found a notice of hearing taped to the side of my mailbox informing me I was scheduled to appear at an HOA disciplinary meeting next Monday. It warned that failure to appear could result in mandatory community sanctions, whatever that meant. I took that one straight to the Chalk County Clerk's office. "Silver Pines," the woman behind the counter asked, looking at the papers. "They've been pushing their reach lately. You're outside their boundary here, let me show you." She pulled up a zoning overlay on her monitor and pointed to my lot. "See that you're in unincorporated land. No HOA governance. Not unless you opted in." "I never did," I said. "Well, then none of this applies. You can file a formal cease and desist if they keep it up." "I might need to," I said. "I've got security footage and police reports, and now they're distributing fake citations." She gave a knowing nod. "You're not the first. Karen's name comes up a lot." That evening, I typed up a letter. and emailed it to the HOA's official address, CCing Karen directly, to whom it may concern. I am not, nor have I ever been subject to the Silver Pines HOA. My property is legally excluded from your jurisdiction, as reflected in county records and land surveys. Any further attempts to harass, fine, or discipline me will be considered willful defamation and will be met with appropriate legal response. Please remove my name and address from your enforcement database immediately. Sincerely, Nathan C. Halpern. I hit send. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of it. But on Friday, I got a phone call, a number I didn't recognize. Nate Halpern, the voice asked. Speaking. This is Deputy Alan Reyes. We've had a report filed by a member of the HOA alleging that you threatened residents during a private event last weekend. I reviewed your footage from the incident. Everything seems to check out, but I'm required to follow up. I sighed. Karen again. She didn't give a name, he said, but yes. Look, I know the deputy who responded. You're clean. Just letting you know she's still pushing. Thanks, I said. I'll keep the backups ready. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't that I was afraid, but something about the quiet had changed. I'd always found comfort in solitude, how the trees buffered sound, how the water seemed to absorb tension. But now, I felt watched. My peace wasn't broken by noise, but by intent. I'd spent a lifetime identifying motives, hidden agendas, small lies that lead to bigger ones, and I could feel it in the air. Karen wasn't done. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of my property. My no trespassing signs were still in place, though one had fresh scratches like someone tried to peel it off. I checked the camera feeds. Nothing new, at least not yet. I decided to put up new signage anyway. Private property, not under HOA authority. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I printed them clean, laminated them, and bolted them into fence posts around the drive and near the dock. I didn't want to fight, but I wasn't going to make it easy for her either. 2 days later, the retaliation came. The neighborhood newsletter, another one of Karen's little propaganda pieces, showed up in my mailbox. The front page featured a photo of my cabin, zoomed in, taken from the road clearly without permission. Below it, unfriendly neighbor threatens our peaceful lakeside community. Last week, during a friendly HOA gathering, an individual on the Western Shore verbally harassed and intimidated families, disrupting what was intended to be a joyful summer event. This behavior is being formally addressed by our board and reported to local authorities. Residents are advised to avoid interactions with this individual until further notice. No names, of course, but the implication was clear. They painted me as some angry, isolated danger, a man to be feared. It was all the excuse Karen needed to stir up the rest of the neighborhood people who hadn't even been at the party. I started noticing cars slowing in front of my property, drivers craning their necks to get a look. One woman even took photos from her passenger seat as I collected firewood. That was the tipping point. I wasn't going to let my father's legacy, the cabin, the dock, this land, be warped by fear or buried under HOA fiction. It was time to stop playing defense. I don't remember what I was doing when the second patrol car arrived. Maybe sweeping the pine needles off the porch, maybe checking the wire at the back gate, but I remember the hum of the engine as it pulled up the gravel path. That low, city-issued purr had become far too familiar lately. 2 deputies this time, neither of them ones I'd met before. Both were young, barely into their 30s. They moved with that mixture of protocol and discomfort that told me they didn't quite know what they were walking into. I recognized the look from years ago officers sent in, not because something actually happened, but because someone higher up didn't want to be accused of ignoring a complaint. Karen was standing behind them at the edge of the road, arms crossed. Red windbreaker zipped up to her chin, face full of triumph, barely disguised as concern. She wasn't shouting this time. She didn't have to. Her show had already begun. "Good morning," I said, stepping off the porch, slowly, both hands in plain sight. The taller deputy gave me a nod. "Sir, we've had a complaint filed against you again. Mind if we talk for a moment?" I bit back the sarcasm and nodded. "Of course. Want to do it inside or out here?" "Out here is fine," the shorter one said, already glancing around at my posted signs and the camera above the doorway. I stood on the gravel in front of them and waited for whatever script they'd been given. Karen stayed back far enough to pretend she wasn't listening, but close enough to devour every word. The taller deputy cleared his throat. The complaint says there was an incident involving verbal threats and brandishing a weapon toward a resident last night. You want to tell us about that? I blinked. Last night? That's correct. Well, I said last night I ate leftover chili, read 2 chapters of Watership Down, and was asleep by 9:30. Alone. No visitors. No noise. No incidents. He looked slightly embarrassed. You have any video footage to confirm that? I have 12 hours of motion-activated security coverage saved to 2 drives, I said. You're welcome to come in and see. They followed me up the steps, and once again, I played them the night's uneventful footage. Me eating. Me reading. Me turning off the lights and locking the door. Silence. Stillness. Crickets and moonlight. The only thing remotely dramatic was my dog, a stray shepherd mix I'd adopted, barking once at a raccoon. When I turned back to them, their demeanor had changed. We figured this might be the case, the taller one said. We've had a few calls from this address lately. From the same party. It's being noted in our report. Noted how? I asked. He hesitated. There's only so much we can do without a formal complaint from you. But yes, we're aware it may be a pattern. What Karen is doing, I said plainly, is harassment, false police reports, defamation. She's trying to manufacture a threat where there isn't one. The shorter deputy nodded slightly. You're within your rights to file. I studied their faces. They weren't hostile. In fact, they seemed tired. Like I wasn't the first quiet resident they'd been sent to check on because someone powerful had demanded it. I'll think about it, I said. But you can pass along a message. If she calls you again with baseless claims, I'll have my attorney file an official grievance. She's abusing emergency services. They both nodded. The taller one reached into his breast pocket and handed me a card. If anything happens, call me directly. It'll save dispatch some time. When they left, Karen pretended not to see me watching her. She turned sharply and walked away, like she had business to attend to. Like she wasn't just loitering at the edge of my property line with binoculars in her soul. I stood at the edge of the porch, long after they were gone. The sky above the lake had turned a dull pewter, and thunder rolled in the distance. I'd never wished for a storm more in my life. The next morning, the retaliation began. It was subtle at first. The trash pickup I'd arranged through the county, a monthly service that had never missed a beat, suddenly stopped. I called the sanitation office, and the clerk sounded confused. We received a property transfer form, she said. HOA handles waste services in your area now. I frowned. I'm not under the HOA. Oh, she said. Then the form's invalid. Want me to reverse it? Please do, I said. And send me a copy of the paperwork. When it arrived the next day, the transfer of service had been signed by a name I didn't recognize, but the request originated from the HOA office. Next came the landscaping crew. I'd hired a young guy named Miguel once a month to help clear brush near the western slope where erosion had eaten into my father's old footpath. He texted me on Thursday to cancel. Sri Mr. Halpern, HOA said I can't work there anymore. They said the lakefront's under jurisdiction, and I need a special permit. I replied, You don't. My land's exempt. Want me to talk to your supervisor? Miguel didn't answer. He never came back. I didn't blame him. Friday morning, I opened my gate and found orange plastic tape strung across the eastern edge of my fence line. A flimsy stake in the dirt read, Caution. Sensitive environmental area. Pending review. It was laughable. That side of the property was nothing but boulders and brush. Hardly sensitive unless you count the weeds Karen probably stepped on when she snuck onto my land. I yanked the tape down and called the Shaw County's Environmental Division. After a long hold, I was transferred to a man named Kyle, who sounded half asleep until I mentioned the HOA. Oh yeah, he said. Silver Pines. We've had a few complaints filed recently, most anonymous, all from the same general address. We haven't approved any actual site reviews for that zone. So can I remove the markers? They're not official, he said. You're free to toss them. I did more than that. I burned them in my fire pit. Still, the pettiness continued. Flyers appeared in mailboxes around the neighborhood, unsigned, unmarked, printed on plain white paper. Know who lives next door. Some residents think they're above the rules. They stock weapons refuse inspections and threaten families who simply want to enjoy the lake. Is your family safe? I found one folded and stuffed beneath a pine cone on my porch. No envelope, no postage, no courage. That evening, as I reviewed my camera footage, I caught her. Just before sunrise, red jacket, sunglasses despite the gloom. Walking up my driveway like she owned it, slipping the flyer beneath the pine cone. No mask, no disguise. Karen. The next morning I printed off the image. Not just a screenshot, but a full-page, high-resolution still of her crouched on my porch. Then I made 25 copies. At dawn, I walked to every single community mailbox on the east side of Silver Pines and slid one into each slot. On the back of the photo, I wrote, "This woman trespassed on my property at 5:32 a.m." Security cameras recorded her distributing anonymous threats. Ask yourself, is your family safe? It wasn't my proudest move, but it felt damn good. By noon, Linda Marks knocked on my door. I hadn't seen her this close to my place in years. She wore jeans and a windbreaker, no clipboard, no HOA folder. Just a tired smile. "I don't support what she's doing," she said, "but it might be time to make it official." "Make what official?" I asked. "Your exemption," she said. "I know you already have the paperwork, but the board isn't going to stop unless you go public with it. If you draft a letter and have the county reaffirm it at the town hall meeting next week, it'll be recorded. Permanently. Publicly. It would tie our hands." I considered that. Would it stop Karen? She sighed. No. But it would stop the rest of us from being pulled into her vendetta. It would also protect you if she tries to escalate. I looked past her at the still surface of the lake. "I'll draft it tonight." "Good," she said. "You know, a lot of us never read those flyers, but the picture that got people talking." She turned to leave, paused at the steps. "And Nate," she added, "not everyone here is your enemy. We just didn't know the truth." I watched her walk off down the gravel, her shadow stretching long across the pine needles. That night, I sat at my desk and typed a letter. It was simple, factual, laced with legal references and citations from the county charter. But I ended it with something personal. And this cabin has stood here longer than the sign that says Silver Pines. It was built by a man who believed in boundaries, not just fences, but respect. I've honored those boundaries. I've asked for nothing but to be left alone. But respect is a two-way street, and mine ends here. I sent the letter to the county clerk and the HOA simultaneously. Then I copied it to every resident in the HOA's contact list using the official email chain Karen herself had launched years ago for community announcements. By morning, my inbox had 42 replies. Most of them said the same thing. "We didn't know. Thank you. Sorry it went this far. Let us know if you need anything." Karen didn't reply, but she wasn't done. She was just changing tactics. I've never been the kind of man who sues for sport. I've never threatened legal action just to make a point, and I've certainly never used lawyers as blunt weapons. But after Karen trespassed, distributed lies, and tried to turn the community against me, I realized that she wasn't going to stop, not with reason, not with exposure, and not with shame. Some people escalate because they're desperate. Karen escalated because she couldn't stand losing. And losing in front of witnesses, at a public hearing with evidence, playing across a projector screen, had pierced something fragile in her. So she changed course. From direct confrontation to quiet sabotage. From bold to insidious. It was time I did the same. Not with threats, not with emotion, with precision. I called Graham Flores. He wasn't listed in any phone book. Not anymore. Graham and I had crossed paths years ago when I was working a corruption case inside a federal development agency. He was a land use attorney back then, sharp as hell, and neck deep in municipal code books. I helped him during a whistleblower case that nearly destroyed his career. After he won, he told me, "If you ever need a favor, I'll burn the handbook for you." I didn't need fire, just leverage. He answered on the third ring. "Halpern," he said. "How long's it been?" "Too long," I replied. "You still work with zoning boards." "I own 2 of them. What's up?" I gave him the 10-minute version. Karen, the HOA, overreached, the false accusations, the phantom violation notices, the trespassing. He listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he let out a low whistle. "You documented all this. I've got footage logs, emails, witness statements, body cam files, and county-confirmed exemptions." "Perfect," he said. "I'll file 2 things. First, a formal cease and desist against the HOA. That'll go to their board and their insurance provider, which they're legally required to carry. Second, I'll request a special audit from the Office of Residential Governance. If the HOA has misappropriated funds or enforced rules on non-members, they're vulnerable, especially if it led to police intervention. And what about the county zoning board, I asked. I'll send a letter on my firm's letterhead reminding them that you were harassed by a private entity with no legal authority on your land. You'll be surprised how fast they distance themselves when they smell litigation. Do it, I said. I already am. By the next day, Graham had filed the first round. I didn't even have to go into town. The mailman, Greg, a Vietnam vet, who hated Karen more than I did, handed me a receipt and winked. You stirred the hornet's nest, he said. I didn't stir it, I replied. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there. That same afternoon, I received an email from the county. Dear Mr. Halpern, in light of the recent documentation and legal notification from Mr. Graham Flores, we are temporarily suspending all HOA-initiated enforcement requests, pending further review of jurisdictional boundaries. You are not subject to any current actions. If you receive further correspondence from Silver Pines HOA, please notify our office immediately. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a shield. The next HOA newsletter didn't feature my cabin. In fact, it didn't mention me at all. What it did include, tucked between an announcement about the fall gardening workshop and a blurb on mailbox decorations, was this. Due to recent legal reviews and resident feedback, the HOA board is revising its enforcement procedures and reviewing property boundaries. We thank residents for their patience during this transition. It was vague, toothless, but it reeked of panic. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I invited someone over. Her name was Miriam. She was a widow who lived 3 streets over with a soft smile and a sharper mind than anyone gave her credit for. We'd spoken in passing a dozen times, mostly about weather or local wildlife. She once brought me a jar of elderberry jam, just because, and I never forgot the taste. I asked if she'd like to sit on the dock for coffee. She said yes. We sat quietly, the water glinting gold beneath the late summer sun, and for the first time I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. She already knew. The whole neighborhood knew. Not just about Karen, but about me. Not the twisted version she'd painted, but the man who stood his ground with dignity. I'm glad you're still here, Miriam said softly. Me too, I replied. A week later, a county inspector showed up, this time unannounced, but not aggressive. He wore a short-sleeved shirt and carried a thin folder. I'm here for the site verification, he said. Standard procedure for boundary disputes. But don't worry. We've already seen the documentation. Just need to walk the line and snap a few photos. I walked with him along the fence, across the dock, and around the back lot. He nodded at everything, took notes on a small tablet, and finally turned to me near the old firewood stack. You're clean, he said. Karen's filed 13 separate complaints this year. 9 of them involved you. All of them unsubstantiated. Will that be in the record, I asked. He smiled. It already is. He left with a quiet respect, and I went back inside, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in the kitchen breathing slower than I had in weeks. Karen had overplayed her hand, and for the first time she was losing support. But she wasn't done. One night around 2:15 a.m., my dog began barking deep guttural, not like his usual half-hearted warnings. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out barefoot onto the porch. The motion light clicked on. Nothing. I walked the path toward the dock. Halfway there, I saw it. A bucket of nails dumped sharp side up, scattered across the gravel just before my gate. Someone had deliberately tried to damage my truck tires. I didn't panic. I didn't rage. I picked up each nail slowly, one by one, dropped them into a bag, and carried it inside. Then I rewound the cameras. There was no face, just a silhouette in a hoodie, quick and hunched. But the posture was familiar. And the license plate on the dark sedan parked up the road was even more familiar. Karen's son. He'd come home from college the week prior. It didn't matter. I wasn't pressing charges. Not yet. But I saved the footage, copied it 3 times, and filed it under a new folder titled Escalation If Needed. I wasn't done playing defense. I was building my case brick by brick, because soon everything Karen thought she controlled was going to slip right through her fingers. 3 days after the nail trap incident, I got a call from Graham. They've opened the case, he said, voice firm. County audit is moving forward. They've requested full financial records from Silver Pines HOA for the last 5 fiscal years. And this is the important part. They're specifically flagging any fines or enforcement actions against properties not within the HOA jurisdiction. Like mine, I said. Exactly. Which means Karen's about to get very uncomfortable. I leaned back in my chair, the lake breeze drifting through the open window. Good. She'll likely try to get ahead of it, he warned. Redirect, manipulate the narrative, play the victim. Don't engage. Just keep your documentation tight. I already had a binder on my shelf labeled HOA Offense. It contained printed screenshots of every email exchange, still frames from every security video county parcel maps, notarized boundary letters, and even the voice recording from the sanitation office confirming the illegal service transfer. I wasn't just defending my cabin anymore. I was becoming the exhibit. The following Monday, the county dispatched a 3-person team to begin the audit, not just of Karen, but of the entire Silver Pines board. 2 men and a woman in khakis and clipboards walked into the HOA office, while residents hovered at the periphery, curious but cautious. I watched from the shade of my front porch, sipping coffee unnoticed. Within hours, things began to move. First came a string of HOA members stepping down, quiet resignations that weren't announced but were whispered through the neighborhood grapevine. Craig Henson, the guy who used to report suspicious raccoons, was one of the first to walk. Then it was the treasurer, followed by the compliance chairwoman. By Friday, the Silver Pines HOA board was down to 2, Karen and Linda. Linda had stopped showing up. Karen, meanwhile, was unraveling. She started walking the neighborhood at odd hours, clipboard in hand, knocking on doors trying to collect support statements. More than one neighbor told me she looked manic, demanding signatures, accusing people of siding with the intruder by the lake. People stopped answering the door. I wasn't surprised when the HOA's website suddenly went offline, but I was surprised when Karen knocked on my door. It was a Thursday afternoon, the lake still and the air brittle with anticipation. I opened the door, expecting maybe the mailman or another inspector. There she stood, no blazer, no makeup. Her hair pulled into a taut ponytail that made her jawline look even sharper. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she clutched a folder so tightly her knuckles were white. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. She took a breath. "I need to talk." I didn't step aside. "About..." She looked over her shoulder like someone might be listening. "Can I come in?" "No." Her nostrils flared, but she nodded. "Fine." She opened the folder and held it out toward me. Inside were copies of the HOA's financial reports, at least 100 pages thick. "You've got what you want. The county's crawling all over this place. The board's dead. People blame me." "They should," I said. She winced. "You don't know what it's like keeping this place running. The demands, the complaints. Everyone expects perfection. And when I try to bring order, when I try to protect property values, I'm the villain." "No," I said. "You're the villain because you lied. You trespassed. You called the cops on me with fabricated stories. You let your son vandalize my property. And you turned a community into your personal power fantasy." She looked like I'd slapped her. "He didn't mean to hurt anyone." "You raised him," I said simply. She closed the folder, her hands trembling. "They're going to find it all, aren't they?" "Yes." Karen swallowed hard. For a moment, I thought she might cry. But her pride swallowed it. "You should know," she said, voice tight. "There's a clause in the HOA's original charter, Section 3B. If a member..." "I'm not a member," I cut in. "That's the part you never could accept." She looked down at her shoes. "Why didn't you just join?" she asked softly. I blinked. "Why would I?" "To make things easier. For you." She didn't answer. Just stood there, small, sunken, like the wind had gone out of her sails. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. I didn't take the folder. I didn't invite her in. I simply said, "You should leave." And she did. The audit results came 2 weeks later. The county mailed me a copy, sealed official, and stamped in blue ink. Findings. Silver Pines, HOA, exceeded its legal authority by issuing citations to properties outside its jurisdiction. Funds collected from non-members are subject to repayment and may constitute civil violations. Multiple complaints were filed under false pretenses and, in some cases, weaponized for personal vendettas. The HOA's current board leadership is under review pending legal outcomes. Recommendation: dissolution of current HOA enforcement body and restructuring under court oversight. It was as close to justice as I'd hoped for. Within days, the signs came down. The rulebooks were removed from the pavilion. And a public notice appeared on the community bulletin board. Effective immediately, the Silver Pines HOA is under administrative suspension pending reorganization. All enforcement activity is frozen. Karen was nowhere to be seen. Her house sat dark for weeks. Rumor had it she'd gone to stay with her sister in another state. The power was shut off. The yard grew wild. A few neighborhood kids started calling it the ghost house. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. I simply walked down to my dock one morning, coffee in hand, and listened to the birds, the water, the wind moving through the trees. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I heard nothing else. No distant engine, no forced laughter, no clipboard shoes on gravel. Just the lake. And peace. But I wasn't done yet. The county scheduled the final hearing on a gray Monday morning in mid-October. It was held in the community courthouse in Fair Ridge. A small concrete building with faded blue trim and a creaky flagpole that had probably seen more small claims disputes than it had serious rulings. But for me, it was the closest thing to a reckoning. The hearing wasn't just about Karen or even Silver Pines. The county had folded multiple complaints from surrounding communities into a broader discussion about HOA overreach. My case, it turned out, had triggered a chain reaction. 3 more residents from different subdivisions showed up that morning with thick folders and quiet rage tucked behind polite voices. The courtroom filled faster than expected. Folding chairs had to be brought in. I sat near the front, flanked by Graham on one side and Miriam on the other. She wasn't there as a witness. She was there because I asked her to be. I needed someone beside me who understood quiet dignity, someone who saw the war beneath the words. Karen entered through the side door like a woman walking into her own funeral. Gone were the sunglasses, the bright clothes, the commanding presence. She wore a gray jacket, flat shoes, no makeup. Even her walk had changed, shorter strides, shoulders hunched, eyes darting to avoid contact. Her son was not with her. She took a seat at the far end of the gallery alone. The presiding officer, Commissioner Harville, was a woman in her 60s, with clipped vowels and eyes sharp enough to cut through pretense. She called the hearing to order with no small talk and began reading the findings of the audit aloud. It is the opinion of this commission, she said, that the Silver Pines Homeowners Association, under its most recent board leadership, operated beyond its legal mandate in multiple instances. These include, but are not limited to, issuing fines to non-members staging unauthorized events on private property, submitting false reports to law enforcement, and distributing defamatory material. Karen shifted in her seat. Her hands were clenched in her lap, white and still. Harville continued. In addition to these findings, the commission has reviewed documented video evidence of trespassing, a falsified police report, and attempts to undermine county zoning jurisdiction through fabricated environmental claims. She looked directly at Karen. These actions are not only outside the scope of an HOA, they are violations of civil code. The room was quiet. Even the rustle of papers had stopped. Harville turned to me. Mr. Halpern, do you wish to submit any additional testimony? I stood. My knees cracked slightly, a reminder of years spent crouching behind barricades and cold walls. I took a breath and looked around. I moved to Crescent Lake to retire, I said. Not from work, but from noise, from damage. I chose a cabin built by my father with the understanding that its boundaries were sacred. I honored those lines. I respected this community's even when it didn't respect me. I glanced at Karen, but didn't linger. I never wanted to be in this room. I never wanted to file complaints, send legal notices, or pull video footage from my porch. But I was forced to, because someone in power refused to accept limits. She turned neighbors into spies and rules into weapons. And when the law didn't give her the control she wanted, she made her own version. I paused. This isn't about me anymore. It's about every person in this county who lives in fear of their HOA, who wonders if trimming a tree, installing a ramp, or saying no to a barbecue might invite retaliation. That's not community. That's control. Harville gave a single nod. Thank you, Mr. Halpern. Please remain seated. Then she turned to Karen. Mrs. Buckley, do you wish to make a statement? Karen didn't rise. She cleared her throat once and said, barely audible, I made mistakes. Harville raised an eyebrow. Do you take responsibility for those mistakes? Karen blinked quickly, her lips parted, then closed again. I tried to do what was best for the neighborhood, she said. That wasn't the question, Harville replied. A long silence followed. The commissioner sat back in her chair and pulled a typed page from her folder. Here are the rulings of this commission, she said. Effective immediately, the Silver Pines HOA board is dissolved. All enforcement actions from the past 24 months are vacated. Fines collected from non-members must be refunded within 60 days. The HOA's assets will be held in escrow pending reorganization. A county oversight liaison will be appointed to monitor any future board activities for the next 2 years. A breath of collective relief moved through the courtroom. Furthermore, she added, Mrs. Buckley is barred from holding any HOA or neighborhood governance position in this county for a minimum of 5 years. Any future complaints filed by Mrs. Buckley will require verification under penalty of perjury. Graham exhaled beside me. Miriam reached over and gently squeezed my hand. Karen didn't react. She stared straight ahead, eyes glassy, as if the sound had gone out of the room. The hearing adjourned. People stood and stretched, talking in low voices, some already pulling out phones to text neighbors who hadn't come. I shook hands with Commissioner Harville and thanked her. She returned the gesture with a firm grip and said, Your evidence was airtight. You should consider public office. I laughed. I'm done chasing power. As I turned to leave, I saw Karen still sitting in her chair. For a moment, I almost walked past her. Almost. But then I stopped. She looked up at me hollow-eyed. You really had to destroy everything she said. I shook my head. No, Karen. You did that all by yourself. I just held up the mirror. I left her there. Outside, the air smelled like autumn, the crisp mix of pine and cooling earth. The sky above Fair Ridge was pale blue, streaked with fading clouds. Graham got a call and stepped away. Miriam stood beside me, her scarf dancing in the breeze. You didn't gloat, she said. No point, I replied. It's already over. You think she'll leave town? I think she's already gone in the ways that matter. We stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Miriam said, Now what? I looked down at my hands. They were steady. My breathing was easy. I go home, I said. And for the first time in a long while, I just live. It took weeks for the dust to settle, but the silence that followed the hearing felt different this time. It wasn't the uneasy hush that comes after a threat. It was the kind of quiet that settles in when something heavy has finally been lifted. Karen's house went up for sale in early November. No announcement. No farewell letter. Just a small sign hammered into the lawn by a local agent, the corners fluttering in the wind. Within 3 weeks, a young couple with 2 kids and a golden retriever moved in. They waved when they saw me. The kind of wave that said, We have no idea who you are, but we're friendly. I waved back. The HOA, if you could still call it that, was restructured under a new name. Lakeview Neighbors Committee. No power, no fines, no enforcement authority. Just a community newsletter, potluck suggestions, and the occasional request to shovel snow off the community path. Linda chaired it for a while, but even she stepped down after 3 months. People realized they didn't need a board to live respectfully beside one another. They just needed to stop being afraid of one. I spent that winter fixing the dock. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The boards had warped slightly from years of lake water swelling and freezing. I replaced them, slowly, carefully, using some of my father's old tools, ones I hadn't touched since I was a teenager. Each nail I hammered felt like closure, not just for the cabin, but for every injustice that had been carved into my property by someone else's hand. Miriam came by more often, sometimes with fresh bread, sometimes with a small thermos of soup. She never asked about Karen. She never brought up the hearing. But her presence was its own kind of healing. One afternoon in December, she found me sanding the handrail on the dock and said, It's funny, isn't it, how peace makes people more visible? I smiled. You mean how people come out of hiding when they stop being afraid? She nodded. Exactly. They're waving more now, talking again. Someone even brought me a pie last week, first time in 3 years. I looked toward the shore. The lake reflected the early dusk sky, soft orange, and pale lavender like a mirror rippling just slightly with breath. I think they're just remembering who they are without someone telling them who to fear. She didn't reply, but she stayed beside me until the sun dipped beneath the tree line. In January, I received an envelope from the county. No return address. Inside was a certified copy of the final ruling official language stating the HOA had been stripped of its enforcement powers, that all records of fines or warnings issued to me were expunged, and that a formal apology had been filed on behalf of the board. I didn't need the apology, but I kept the letter. It joined the others in the folder labeled Closure. Spring came early that year. The dogwoods bloomed in April, painting the shoreline in bursts of white. The lake warmed faster than usual, and I found myself swimming again just like I used to when I was a boy before deployments and files and courtrooms and neighbors who carried clipboards instead of casseroles. One Sunday, as I was cleaning out the boathouse, I found something I hadn't seen since my father passed, a sealed tin box tucked behind the rafters. Inside were photographs of the original cabin, a handwritten map of the original boundary lines, and a letter addressed to whoever watches the lake next. It wasn't poetic. My father wasn't that kind of man. But it said exactly what it needed to. This place isn't about the wood or the nails or the view. It's about space. Not just land, but space to be who you are without permission. Whoever you are, don't let anyone take that from you. I sat with that letter in my lap for a long time. Then I copied it, framed it, and hung it above the cabin's front door. Not long after, I started getting letters, handwritten, folded in half, slipped into my mailbox by people too shy to knock. Notes from neighbors. Some I barely knew. Others I thought had written me off months ago. One said, "I'm sorry I believed her. You never deserved what she did." Another read, "Thank you for standing up when the rest of us stayed quiet. You reminded me how to be brave." And my favorite, "If you ever host a barbecue, I'll bring the ribs." I pinned them on a corkboard inside the cabin, every last one of them. A messy mosaic of quiet justice. One evening in early May, I sat on the dock with Miriam, our feet dangling just above the water. The sunset was slow that night, generous, the kind that makes you forget to check your watch. She looked at me and asked, "Do you miss anything about how it was before?" I thought about it. "I miss not having to fight," I said. She nodded. "But I'm proud that I did," I added. "Good," she said, and leaned her head on my shoulder. In the distance, the new family was skipping stones. A boy's voice echoed across the lake, "I got 5 skips." The girl shouted back, "That's because you cheated." Laughter followed. And for the first time in a long, long time, I realized I wasn't just living on the edge of the lake anymore. I was part of the lake again. Not as a holdout, not as a relic, but as someone who belonged, not because I'd complied, but because I'd endured. Because I'd stood firm. Because I remembered what my father taught me. And because sometimes the only way to protect peace is to fight for it until it's quiet enough to return on its own. The lake rippled gently beneath us, and the wind whispered through the pines. Welcome back.